A simple black nurse boards Billionaire's jet by mistake. Now she's on a romantic trip in Hawaii with him. Sometimes the wrong plane takes you to exactly the right place. Jasmine Washington had exactly 17 minutes to catch her flight when she made the mistake that would change her life forever. She said yes to a man in uniform who asked if she was Miss Washington and pointed toward a gleaming private jet. What she thought was an upgrade to her sister's wedding in Chicago turned out to be a first-class ticket to Hawaii, with a billionaire who was about to discover that some things money can't buy and some people refuse to be bought. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you accidentally stepped into someone else's life? What if that mistake led you to discover something about yourself you never knew existed? Share in the comments below and make sure you subscribe to this channel for more. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jasmine Washington checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes, 6:47 a.m., and she was already running behind for her flight to her sister's wedding in Chicago. Her hospital shift had run late when Mrs. Henderson's blood pressure spiked, and now she was racing through the private section of the airport, her scrubs wrinkled and her carry-on bag threatening to fall apart at the seams. "Excuse me," she called to a uniformed man near a gleaming jet. "Is this the 7:30 to Chicago?" He glanced at her clipboard. "Washington." "Yes, Jasmine Washington." "Right this way, Miss Washington." The confusion was understandable. She'd won the ticket in a hospital raffle, some kind of luxury experience donated by a grateful patient's family. She'd assumed it meant first class on a regular airline, not this pristine private jet with leather seats that probably cost more than her car. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Alexander Hartwell was staring at his reflection in his Manhattan penthouse, adjusting his tie for the 4th time. The numbers on his phone's screen blurred together. Another acquisition, another merger, another day of people telling him what he wanted to hear. At 34, he'd built a tech empire that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country, but success felt increasingly hollow. His assistant had arranged a weekend in Hawaii, supposedly for the art auction, but really because his therapist had suggested he needed to reconnect with beauty and spontaneity. Alexander wasn't sure he remembered how to do either, but he'd learned to trust expensive advice. The flight to Hawaii was supposed to be his sanctuary, 3 hours of silence to prepare for another performance of being Alexander Hartwell, the man who had everything. What he didn't know was that his assistant had accidentally used the wrong manifest when confirming passengers, and that a tired nurse from Brooklyn was about to disrupt his carefully ordered world in the most unexpected way. Jasmine settled into the leather seat, overwhelmed by the luxury but trying to appear composed. She'd worked 3 doubles this week to afford her sister's wedding gift, and this unexpected upgrade felt like the universe finally giving her something back. The champagne the flight attendant offered seemed excessive for 7:30 a.m., but she accepted it with a grateful smile. "Are you flying to Chicago often?" the attendant asked. "Chicago." Jasmine looked confused. Isn't this the Hawaii flight?" The attendant's face went pale. "Ma'am, this is indeed the Hawaii flight. May I see your boarding pass?" As the truth unraveled, Jasmine's heart hammered against her ribs. She was on the wrong plane, heading to the wrong continent, and apparently, she was about to meet the one person who could either save her from this disaster or make it infinitely worse. The jet door sealed shut with a soft hiss, and in the distance, Alexander's black car pulled onto the tarmac. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where a simple mistake led to something life-changing? What would you do if you suddenly found yourself in a world completely different from your own? Alexander boarded his jet with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times, his mind already shifting into travel mode. He nodded to the crew, settled into his preferred seat, and reached for his laptop, until he noticed he wasn't alone. She was curled in the seat across from him, her dark skin glowing against the cream leather, her natural hair pulled back in a bun that had come slightly undone during what appeared to have been a frantic morning. She wore scrubs, mint green with tiny cartoon stethoscopes, and she was staring at him with the kind of wide-eyed panic that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "I think I'm on the wrong plane. I'm supposed to be going to Chicago for my sister's wedding, but they said this is going to Hawaii, and I have no idea how this happened, and—" "Breathe," Alexander said, his voice gentler than he'd intended. He'd expected many things from this flight, but not this, not her. "What's your name?" "Jasmine Washington. I'm a nurse at Brooklyn Methodist, and I won this ticket in a raffle, and I know I don't belong here, but the door is already closed, and—" "The door is closed," he confirmed, and something in his tone made her stop talking and really look at him. He had the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers. Sharp jawline, dark hair that looked effortlessly perfect, eyes that seemed to see too much. But there was something in his expression that wasn't quite what she'd expected from someone who clearly had money. A loneliness that looked familiar. "You're him, aren't you?" she said quietly. "The billionaire they keep talking about on the news. Alexander Hartwell." "I am." He studied her face, waiting for the shift, the moment when people realized who he was and what he could do for them. But Jasmine just nodded, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. "Well, Mr. Hartwell, I need to get off this plane. I have a wedding to attend, and I can't afford to miss it, and I definitely can't afford to accidentally go to Hawaii." Alexander found himself almost smiling. When was the last time someone had made demands of him instead of requests? "I'm afraid that's not possible. We're already taxiing." She looked out the window and saw the airport buildings sliding past. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment he saw past the determination to the exhaustion underneath, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that came from working too hard for too long. "How much trouble am I in?" she asked. "Legally, none." This was clearly a mistake. He paused, studying her face. "Personally, that depends on how you feel about Hawaii. I've never been to Hawaii. I've never been anywhere except New York and New Jersey, and that one time we went to Philadelphia for my cousin's graduation." She was talking faster now, nerves making her words tumble together. "I don't have a passport. Wait, do I need a passport? I don't have clothes for Hawaii. I have scrubs and one nice dress for the wedding that I definitely can't wear to Hawaii because it's royal blue, and my sister spent 3 months making sure it would look good in photos and—" "Jasmine." The way he said her name made her stop mid-sentence. "You have a passport. It was required for the raffle ticket. And Hawaii. Hawaii has clothing stores." She stared at him, and he realized he was offering to solve her problems with money, his default response to any complication. But something in her expression stopped him from saying more. "I can't afford Hawaii clothing stores, Mr. Hartwell. I work double shifts to help my mom with her medical bills and send money to my sister for school. This whole thing is a disaster." The honesty in her voice hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had been so matter-of-fact about their limitations? No pleading, no manipulation, just truth. "The raffle ticket," he said carefully, "was for a weekend in Hawaii. All expenses paid. That would include appropriate clothing." She was quiet for a long moment, processing. Why would someone donate that to a hospital raffle? Maybe they thought a nurse deserved a vacation. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. A recognition, maybe, or a question neither was ready to ask. The plane lifted off, carrying them both towards something neither had planned for. "I've never accepted charity," she said finally. "This isn't charity," Alexander replied, though he wasn't entirely sure what it was. "This is an adventure." The word felt foreign in his mouth, but as Jasmine's expression shifted from panic to something that might have been wonder, he realized he meant it. The first hour of the flight passed in careful politeness. Jasmine accepted the meal the flight attendant offered, something involving truffle oil that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget, while Alexander worked on his laptop, stealing glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. She was trying to read a romance novel, but he could see her eyes weren't tracking the words. Instead, she kept looking around the cabin, as if she expected someone to realize she didn't belong and throw her out mid-flight. "You're uncomfortable," he said finally, closing his laptop. "I'm fine." The response was automatic, the kind of deflection she'd mastered from years of not wanting to be anyone's burden. "You're gripping that book like it's a life preserver." She looked down at her hands and consciously loosened her grip. "I'm just processing. This morning I was worried about whether I'd have time to grab coffee before my flight to Chicago. Now I'm on a private jet to Hawaii with a billionaire, and I'm supposed to just roll with it. Why not?" The question was simple, but it made her turn to really look at him. "Because this isn't real life, Mr. Hartwell. Real life is working 16-hour shifts and choosing between fixing your car and buying groceries. Real life is falling asleep in hospital break rooms and having your sister's wedding dress hanging in your closet because you can't afford a hotel room. She gestured around the cabin. This is a fantasy. Maybe you deserve a fantasy. The words hung between them, and Jasmine felt something shift in her chest. A dangerous warmth that had nothing to do with the plane's heating system. You don't know anything about what I deserve, she said, but her voice was softer now. Alexander leaned back in his seat, studying her. I know you're a nurse. I know you work double shifts to help your family. I know you won a raffle ticket and didn't ask for any of this. He paused. I know you could have demanded I fix this situation, make phone calls, get you on another plane. But you didn't. What would be the point? The plane is already in the air. The point would be that I could have done it. Money opens doors, even doors that are supposed to be closed. He said it matter-of-factly, without boasting. But you didn't ask. I don't ask for things I can't repay. What if repayment isn't the point? She was quiet for a long moment, and Alexander realized he was holding his breath, waiting for her answer. He couldn't remember the last time someone's response had mattered to him this much. In my world, she said finally, everything has a price, even kindness, especially kindness. And I've learned that when someone offers you something that seems too good to be true, it usually is. What do you think I want from you? The question was direct, and she met his eyes steadily. I don't know yet, but there's always something. Alexander felt something twist in his chest, a recognition of his own cynicism reflected back at him. How many times had he assumed the worst about people's motives? How many times had he been right? What if there isn't? He asked. Then this really would be a fantasy. They sat in silence for a while, the plane carrying them over the Pacific. Alexander found himself watching her more than he should have, noting the way she absently twisted her hair when she was thinking, the way she smiled at the flight attendant who refilled her water, the way she seemed to carry a kind of warmth that had nothing to do with trying to impress anyone. Can I ask you something? Jasmine said eventually. Go ahead. Why do you look so sad? The question caught him off guard. I don't look sad. You do. Even when you smile, which you don't do very often, your eyes look sad, like you're carrying something heavy. Alexander felt exposed, as if she'd seen through walls he'd spent years building. I think you're projecting. Maybe. Or maybe I recognize it because I see it in the mirror sometimes. She turned to look out the window at the clouds below. My mom always says that the people who work hardest to take care of everyone else usually forget to take care of themselves. Your mom sounds wise. She is. She's also the strongest person I know. Raised 3 kids on her own, worked 2 jobs, never complained. Even when the lupus diagnosis came, she just adapted. Found ways to keep going. Is that why you work so much? To help with her medical bills? Partly. But also because I love what I do. I love helping people feel better, feel less alone when they're scared. She glanced at him. I love being needed. Being needed and being valued aren't the same thing. The observation was quiet, but it hit her like a punch to the chest. She turned to stare at him, and he saw he'd struck something true. How would you know? She asked, and there was an edge to her voice now. Because I've spent my whole life being needed for what I could provide, not for who I am. There's a difference. At least people need you for something real. Money solves problems. Being a good nurse just keeps things from getting worse for 8 hours at a time. That's not true, isn't it? You can change people's lives permanently. I just patch things up until the next crisis. Alexander leaned forward, and she could see something intense in his eyes. You save lives. You hold people's hands when they're dying. You're the face they see when they're most vulnerable, most afraid. That's not patching things up. That's being the light in someone's darkness. The words hung between them, and Jasmine realized she was crying. Not the dramatic sobbing of movies, but the quiet tears of someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. I don't know how to be in your world, she whispered. I don't know how to be in mine either, he replied. Maybe that's why we're here. When they landed at Honolulu International Airport, reality hit Jasmine like a cold wave. She had no hotel reservation, no plan, no idea where she was supposed to go. Alexander had been quiet during the descent, and she'd convinced herself he would politely disappear the moment they touched Hawaiian soil, leaving her to figure out her situation alone. Instead, he waited. "The car is outside," he said as they walked through the private terminal. "I'll drop you wherever you need to go." "That's just it," she said, stopping in the middle of the corridor. "I don't have anywhere to go. The raffle ticket mentioned accommodations, but I don't have any confirmation, and I can't exactly walk into the Royal Hawaiian and ask if they have a room for the confused nurse who won a contest." Alexander pulled out his phone, made a quick call, and spoke in what sounded like fluent Hawaiian. When he hung up, he turned to her. "The Grand Wailea. Presidential suite. It's already been arranged." "By who?" "My assistant handles these things." "Your assistant arranged my accommodations?" "My assistant arranged the raffle donation. All of it. The flight, the hotel, the weekend in Hawaii." He paused. "I'm the grateful patient's family who donated the prize." Jasmine stared at him, pieces clicking into place. "You donated a weekend in Hawaii to a hospital raffle?" "Why?" "Because I thought a nurse deserved a vacation." He said it simply, but she could see there was more to it. "My grandmother was a nurse. She died when I was 12, but I remember her telling me about the patients who thanked her, the families who brought her flowers, the way she felt needed. She worked herself to death, literally. Heart attack at 59, in the hospital break room during a double shift." "I'm sorry. I've been thinking about her more lately. About how she gave everything to everyone else and never gave herself a chance to see Hawaii." He looked at Jasmine. "When my assistant mentioned the hospital raffle, it seemed like the right time to do something she would have approved of. So this whole thing, it's not a mistake. The wrong person getting the ticket? That's a mistake. But maybe not the wrong kind of person." They stood in the terminal, travelers flowing around them, and Jasmine felt the weight of what he was saying. "This is too much. I can't let you pay for a presidential suite for someone you just met. You can't stop me. It's already paid for. Then I'll find somewhere else to stay." "With what money? You said yourself you can't afford Hawaii." The truth stung because it was undeniable. She had maybe $300 in her checking account, and she was supposed to be saving that for her sister's wedding gift. "I'll figure something out. Or," Alexander said carefully, "you could accept that sometimes life gives you unexpected gifts, even if they come from unexpected sources. And what do you get out of this?" "I get to have dinner with someone who doesn't want anything from me except maybe directions to the nearest beach." Despite herself, Jasmine almost smiled. "I don't know where the beach is. I'll show you. Consider it part of the service." The drive into Maui was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the careful politeness of the plane. Jasmine pressed her face to the window, watching the island unfold around them. The lush tropical landscape, the stunning ocean views, the way the late afternoon light made everything look golden and possible. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You sound surprised." "I am. I mean, I knew it would be, but seeing it is different. It's like someone designed a place specifically to make you feel like you're in paradise." Alexander followed her gaze, trying to see the island through her eyes. He'd been to Hawaii dozens of times, but it had always been for business or obligation. He couldn't remember the last time he'd noticed the way the light fell on the palm trees, or the way people sat on beach cafes, as if they had all the time in the world. "The hotel is in Wailea," he said. "Right on the beach. You'll be able to walk to most of the tourist sites." "What about you? Where are you staying?" "I have a place here. A villa near Kapalua Bay." "Of course you do." There was no judgment in her voice, just a kind of weary acceptance that made his chest tighten. "Jasmine, it's okay. I'm not being sarcastic. This is all so far outside my experience that I don't know how to process it. 6 hours ago, I was worried about whether I'd have time to grab coffee before my flight. Now I'm in Hawaii, and you're putting me up in a hotel that probably costs more per night than I make in a month. Does it matter what it costs? It matters to me." "Why?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the island pass by. "Because I don't want to owe you anything I can't repay. And because I don't want to get used to this, and then have to go back to my real life and feel like it's not enough." "What if your real life is enough exactly as it is?" "Easy for you to say. You've never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries." "No, I haven't. But I've had to choose between being alone and being surrounded by people who only see my bank account. I've had to choose between trusting someone and protecting myself from disappointment. I've had to choose between staying safe and taking risks that might actually matter. The car pulled up to the hotel, and Jasmine could see the doormen in their elaborate uniforms waiting to help her with luggage she didn't have. The whole situation felt surreal. "What am I supposed to do for the next 2 days?" she asked. "Whatever you want. Sleep. See the island. Eat fresh fish. Pretend you're someone else for a while. And you. I'll be around. If you need anything. Or want company." He paused. "Or if you just want someone to show you where the beach is. Why are you being so nice to me?" "Maybe because you're being so nice to me." "I haven't been nice. I've been confused and panicked and probably ungrateful. You've been honest. That's rarer than nice." The doorman approached the car, and Jasmine realized this was the moment of decision. She could get out, check into the hotel, and spend the weekend as Alexander Hartwell's charity case. Or she could ask the driver to take her to the airport and figure out how to get home. Or she could take the third option, the one that scared her the most. "If I stay," she said, "and if I let you show me around Hawaii, what happens when this weekend is over?" "I don't know," Alexander said, and the honesty in his voice made her decision for her. "Okay," she said. "Show me where the beach is." The next morning, Jasmine woke up in a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud, in a room that looked like it had been designed for royalty. The presidential suite at the Grand Wailea was everything she'd imagined luxury could be: marble bathroom, sitting area with tropical furniture, windows that looked out over the ocean like a postcard. She'd barely slept, not because the bed wasn't comfortable, but because every time she closed her eyes, she saw Alexander's face when he'd talked about his grandmother. The loneliness in his voice when he'd mentioned being surrounded by people who only saw his bank account. The way he'd looked at her, like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Room service, she assumed, though she hadn't ordered anything. Instead, she found Alexander in the hallway, holding 2 coffee cups and looking like he'd been awake for hours. "I thought you might want to start with coffee," he said. "Hawaiian coffee. It's different from mainland coffee." "You brought me coffee?" "I brought us coffee. If you're interested in company." She was wearing the hotel robe, her hair still messy from sleep, and she felt suddenly self-conscious. "I need to get dressed. There are clothes in the closet. I hope you don't mind. I had my assistant arrange for a few things to be delivered. Nothing too formal, just Hawaii appropriate." Jasmine walked to the closet and opened it to find a carefully curated selection of clothes in her exact size. Sundresses that looked expensive but comfortable, soft cover-ups in colors that would complement her skin tone, swimwear that was beautiful without being too revealing. Everything still had tags from boutiques she'd never heard of. "How did you know my size?" "I asked the flight attendant to check the labels on your scrubs while you were sleeping. I hope that's not too intrusive." She turned to look at him, and he was standing in the doorway looking uncertain. The first time she'd seen him look anything other than perfectly composed. "This is too much," she said. "I know, but I wanted to do it." When was the last time someone wanted to do something nice for you without expecting anything in return? The question hit her harder than she'd expected. "I don't remember." "Then let me. Just for today." She nodded, suddenly unable to speak, and he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made her chest tighten. "I'll wait in the sitting room while you get dressed. Take your time." 20 minutes later, she emerged wearing a flowing sundress in ocean blue that felt like silk and probably was. Alexander was standing by the window, looking out at the ocean, and when he turned to see her, something in his expression made her feel beautiful. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Wherever you want. This is your weekend. I don't know Hawaii well enough to want anything specific. Then I'll show you my favorite places. If that's okay." They started with a walk along Wailea Beach, the morning light turning the water turquoise and gold. Alexander had been quiet at first, but as they walked, he began to talk about the volcanic formations they passed, the history of the islands, the way the ocean looked different in each season. "You love it here," Jasmine observed. "I do. I bought the villa here 5 years ago, thinking I'd use it for business retreats. But I find myself coming here when I need to think, or when I need to remember what it feels like to be somewhere where people don't know who I am." Do people really not recognize you here? Some do, but they're more relaxed about it. In New York, being rich makes you a target for attention. Here, it just makes you another mainland tourist with money. They stopped at a small beachside cafe for lunch, sitting at a table on the sand where they could watch surfers ride the waves. Alexander ordered for both of them in what sounded like basic Hawaiian phrases, and Jasmine found herself fascinated by the way he spoke, confident but not arrogant, comfortable but not entitled. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they waited for their food. "Of course. Why aren't you married? I mean, you're successful, you're—" She paused, realizing she was about to call him attractive. "You must have women throwing themselves at you." "I do. That's the problem." "How is that a problem?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, watching a couple at the next table feed each other bites of fresh pineapple. "When I was 25, I thought I was in love. Her name was Victoria, and she was everything I thought I wanted, beautiful, sophisticated, from a good family. We were together for 2 years, and I was planning to propose. What happened? I overheard her talking to her friend about our relationship, about how she was playing the long game, and how Alexander's not exactly exciting, but he's worth waiting for." He smiled bitterly. "She was talking about my net worth. I'm sorry. The thing is, I wasn't even surprised. I was disappointed, but not surprised. I'd been raised to expect that kind of thing. My parents married for social position, not love. My father always told me that being wealthy meant everyone would want something from you, and it was just a matter of figuring out what. That's a terrible way to live. It's a realistic way to live. Until yesterday, I would have said it was the only way to live." He looked at her. "What about you? Are you married? Dating?" "Neither. I was in a relationship for 3 years, but it ended 8 months ago." "What happened?" Jasmine stirred her tropical drink, considering how much to tell him. "David was a resident at the hospital where I work. We started dating when he was in his 2nd year, and things were good for a while. He was smart, funny, ambitious. I thought we were building something together. But as he got closer to finishing his residency, I started to notice things. The way he'd correct me when I talked about medical procedures in front of his colleagues. The way he'd suggest I might want to go back to school, get my nurse practitioner degree, make something of myself. The way he'd talk about our future like my job was just a hobby I'd give up once he started making real money. He didn't respect what you do. He didn't respect who I am. He wanted me to be someone else, someone who would look good next to Dr. David Patterson at hospital fundraisers and medical conferences." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The final straw was when he told me I should consider getting my hair straightened because it would be more professional for hospital events. He said that, and I realized that he'd never seen me as good enough the way I was. I was just raw material he could shape into the kind of wife he wanted. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something important about my own worth, and it taught me to be suspicious of people who want to change me." Alexander looked at her across the small table, and she could see him processing what she'd said. "Is that why you've been so resistant to all this? The clothes, the hotel, the weekend in Hawaii?" "Partly, but also because I've learned that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. And when someone offers you something you can't afford, they usually want something in return that you can't afford to give. What if I told you that the only thing I want from you is the chance to see Hawaii through your eyes?" I'd say that sounds like something someone says when they want something they can't name yet. Alexander laughed, and the sound was so genuine that it made her smile despite herself. "You're probably right. But what if I told you that I'm tired of being around people who want things from me, and spending time with you is the first time in years that I've felt like I could just be myself? Then I'd say you probably need better friends. I don't have friends. I have associates, employees, and people who want to do business with me. That's sad. It is, but it's also been safe. Until now." Their eyes met across the table, and Jasmine felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared wounds, maybe, or a question about whether healing was possible. "This is dangerous," she said quietly. "I know. I mean it. I can't afford to get attached to someone whose life is so different from mine. And you can't afford to get attached to someone who doesn't fit in your world. What if we decided that our worlds don't matter? Just for today. Is that possible? I don't know, but I'd like to find out. Sometimes the most meaningful connections happen when we're brave enough to be vulnerable with someone who sees the world differently than we do. What walls have you built to protect yourself? And what might be possible if you let someone see past them? The afternoon unfolded like a dream Jasmine had never dared to have. Alexander took her to the Maui Ocean Center, where they spent hours wandering through underwater tunnels surrounded by tropical fish and sea turtles. She found herself drawn to the graceful manta rays, their flowing movements captured in the crystal-clear water. "They're beautiful," she said, standing in front of the large viewing window. "You like marine life?" "I used to. I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was little, before." She trailed off, realizing she was about to share something she rarely talked about. "Before what?" "Before my dad left. College was expensive, and Mom couldn't afford it anymore. I was 17. She studied the manta rays, remembering the feeling of snorkeling in local pools, the way the underwater world reflected endless possibilities. I used to pretend I was exploring coral reefs when I was doing my rounds at the hospital. It made the long shifts feel less endless. Do you still snorkel?" "Sometimes. At Coney Island, when I'm alone. It's silly, but it helps me feel free, I guess." Alexander was quiet for a moment, watching her face as she studied the marine life. "It's not silly. It's beautiful. What about you? What did you want to be when you were 8? "An inventor. I wanted to build things that would help people. Machines that could cure diseases, robots that could keep people company when they were lonely." He smiled at the memory. "I had this notebook where I'd draw all my ideas. Flying cars, houses that could think, computers that could understand emotions. That's actually not that far from what you do now, isn't it? Now I build apps that help people buy things faster, platforms that make companies more efficient. I make money, but I'm not sure I help anyone. You helped me. The raffle, this weekend. You helped a nurse get a break she desperately needed. That was an accident. Was it? Or was it your 8-year-old self finally getting to build something that helps someone?" The observation hit him with unexpected force. He looked at her, this woman who saw things he'd forgotten how to see, and felt something crack open in his chest. They left the aquarium as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Alexander led her to a secluded beach overlook, where they leaned against the railing and watched the light dance on the Pacific. "I have a confession," Jasmine said. "What's that?" "I've been pretending all day that I'm someone else. Someone who belongs in aquariums and expensive restaurants and beautiful clothes. Someone who can casually stroll through Hawaii with a billionaire and act like it's normal. How's that working out for you?" "Better than I expected. It turns out pretending to be confident is almost the same as actually being confident. You don't need to pretend anything with me. Don't I? Look at us." She gestured between them. "Look at where we are. This whole situation is basically an elaborate form of pretending. What if it's not pretending? What if it's just possibility?" She turned to face him fully, and he could see the golden light reflected in her dark eyes. "Alexander, in 2 days this ends. You go back to your life, I go back to mine. You're going to have meetings with important people and make decisions that affect thousands of employees. I'm going to work double shifts and worry about whether I can afford to fix my car. This," she gestured around them, "this is beautiful, but it's not real. It feels real to me. That's because you can afford for it to be real. You can afford to fly to Hawaii on a whim, buy someone a new wardrobe, take them to expensive restaurants. For you, this is Tuesday. For me, this is a fantasy." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and she could see he was struggling with something. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Okay, I'm miserable. I have everything anyone could want, and I'm absolutely miserable. I wake up every morning in a penthouse apartment that costs more than most people make in a year, and I feel empty. I go to work and make decisions that generate millions of dollars, and I feel nothing. I go to social events where people tell me how successful I am, and I want to disappear." "Alexander." "No, let me finish. Yesterday on the plane, when you asked me why I looked sad, it was the first time in years that anyone had seen me clearly enough to ask that question. And today, walking around Hawaii with you, I've felt more like myself than I have in, I don't know how long. That's because you're not trying to impress me. Aren't I? Are you? Because if you are, you're doing a terrible job. You've been vulnerable, honest, a little awkward when you bought me clothes without asking. You've shown me your favorite places instead of trying to show me the most expensive places. You've listened to me talk about my job, my family, my dreams like they matter. They do matter. To you maybe, but not to your world. What if I don't care about my world? The question hung between them, and Jasmine felt her heart start to race. You don't mean that, don't I? What if I told you that I'd rather spend one real day with you than a year surrounded by people who only see me as a bank account? I'd say you're romanticizing this because it's temporary and safe. It's easy to be real with someone you'll never see again. Is that what you think this is? I think this is two lonely people who found each other in an impossible situation and are confusing gratitude and novelty with something deeper. Alexander stepped closer to her, and she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive that probably had a Hawaiian name she couldn't pronounce. What if you're wrong? What if I'm right? Then we enjoy today and tomorrow, and on Monday we go back to our separate lives. But what if you're wrong, and we're walking away from something that could matter? Jasmine looked at him, really looked at him. His hair was slightly messed from the ocean breeze, his expensive shirt had a small wrinkle near the collar, and his eyes held a vulnerability that made her chest ache. He looked human in a way that had nothing to do with money or power. I'm scared, she said quietly. Of what? Of believing this could be real, and then having my heart broken when reality sets in. Of getting used to feeling like I matter to someone, and then going back to feeling invisible. Of letting myself fall for someone whose life is so different from mine that we might as well be from different planets. I'm scared too. Of what? Of the same things. And of something else. What? Of letting you walk away because I'm too afraid to find out if this could work. They stood there on the overlook, the island lights beginning to twinkle around them, and Jasmine felt herself at a crossroads. She could protect herself, keep her walls up, enjoy the fantasy and walk away unscathed. Or she could take the biggest risk of her life and see what happened if she let herself believe that sometimes fairy tales might be possible. What happens if we try? She asked. I don't know, but I'd like to find out. This is crazy. The best things usually are. She looked at him for a long moment, then made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Okay, let's find out. But I have conditions. Name them. First, no more surprises. No more clothes appearing in my closet. No more expensive gestures. If we're going to try this, we do it honestly. Agreed. Second, you have to understand that I can't change my life overnight. I have responsibilities, commitments, people who depend on me. I can't just drop everything and become someone else. I wouldn't want you to. And third, you have to promise me that if this doesn't work, if we try and discover that we're too different or want different things, you'll let me go with dignity. No trying to fix it with money, no grand gestures, no making me feel guilty for being realistic. I promise. And I promise to try. Really try. To be open to possibilities I never thought were possible. Alexander smiled, and this time there was no sadness in his eyes, only hope. Deal. Deal. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. His fingers were warm, his grip gentle but sure, and as they stood there watching the lights dance on the water, Jasmine realized she was no longer pretending to be someone else. She was just being herself, scared, hopeful, brave enough to believe that sometimes the impossible might just be possible. Their last day in Hawaii dawned gray and drizzling, but Jasmine woke up feeling lighter than she had in months. The previous evening had ended with a long dinner at a small beachside restaurant Alexander knew, where they'd talked until the place was nearly empty and the staff was politely stacking chairs around them. They'd walked back to her hotel slowly, neither wanting the day to end, and when he'd kissed her goodnight, softly, tentatively, like a question, she'd felt something shift permanently in her chest. Now, packing her borrowed clothes and preparing to return to reality, she found herself actually excited about the possibility of what might come next. Alexander had promised to visit New York soon, and they'd talked about video calls, about finding ways to navigate the distance and their different worlds. She was folding the ocean blue sundress when her phone rang. Her sister Keisha's name flashed on the screen, and Jasmine answered with a smile. "How's the mystery winner living it up in Hawaii?" Keisha asked, and Jasmine could hear the happiness in her voice. The wedding had gone perfectly, according to the photos Jasmine had been receiving all weekend. "It's been incredible. I can't wait to tell you everything." "Well, make it quick, because I have news. I've been doing some research on your mysterious benefactor." Jasmine's stomach dropped. "What kind of research?" "The internet kind." "Jazz, do you know who donated that raffle prize?" "Alexander Hartwell," Jasmine said carefully. "Do you know why?" "He said it was because his grandmother was a nurse, and he wanted to do something she would have approved of." "That's not the whole story. Jazz, Alexander Hartwell's company is one of the major investors in the consortium that's trying to buy Brooklyn Methodist." The words hit Jasmine like a physical blow. "What?" "They're planning to close the hospital and turn it into luxury condos. It's been all over the news for weeks." "How did you not know this?" "I've been working too many shifts to follow the news." "Keisha, are you sure?" "I'm looking at the article right now. Hartwell Technologies joins consortium planning major development in Brooklyn. Historic hospital slated for demolition pending final regulatory approval." "Jazz, this guy is literally planning to destroy your workplace." Jasmine sank into the hotel room's elegant chair, the phone slipping in her suddenly numb fingers. "He never mentioned it. Maybe he doesn't know you work there specifically?" I told him I work at Brooklyn Methodist. Multiple times." "Oh, honey." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The carefully orchestrated weekend, the expensive gestures, the way he'd seemed so interested in her stories about the hospital, about her patients, about the challenges they faced. He hadn't been falling for her, he'd been gathering intelligence. Or maybe just amusing himself with the irony of romancing someone whose life he was about to destroy. "Jazz, are you still there?" "I have to go," Jasmine said quietly. "Jazz, wait. Maybe there's an explanation." "Maybe. There's always an explanation. It's just never the one you want to hear." She hung up and sat in the silence of the luxury hotel room, surrounded by beautiful things that suddenly felt like props in an elaborate lie. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Looking forward to showing you the road to Hannah this morning. Meet in the lobby at 10. The casual tone, the assumption that she'd be ready and waiting for another day of playing pretend, made her feel sick. She looked at herself in the mirror, wearing clothes he'd bought her, in a room he'd paid for, on an island she'd never have seen without his orchestrated generosity, and saw exactly what she was. A fool. When Alexander arrived at the lobby at 10, he found her waiting with her small carry-on bag, wearing her original scrubs, the clothes he'd bought her folded neatly in a shopping bag beside her. "You're packed," he said, confusion clear in his voice. "I thought we were going to the road to Hannah." "I'm going home." "Jasmine, what's wrong? Did something happen?" She stood up, and he could see immediately that everything had changed. The warmth in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold distance that made his chest tighten. "Brooklyn Methodist," she said simply. Alexander went very still. "What about it?" "You know what about it. You know exactly what about it." "Jasmine, let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you forgot to mention that you're planning to tear down the hospital where I work. How you somehow didn't think that was relevant information to share with the nurse you've been romancing for the past 2 days. It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been playing an elaborate game with someone whose life you're about to destroy." "What was this, some kind of sociological experiment? See how the poor nurse reacts when you show her a life she can never have. That's not what this was." "Then what was it, Alexander?" "Because I'm having trouble seeing it any other way." Alexander ran his hand through his hair, and she could see he was struggling with something. "The investment in the consortium, it's complicated. It's not something I can just walk away from. You're a billionaire. You can walk away from anything you want to. It's not that simple. There are other investors, legal obligations, fiduciary responsibilities." "Stop." Jasmine held up her hand. "Just stop. Do you hear yourself? You're giving me corporate speak about why you can't avoid destroying my workplace. The place where I save lives, where my colleagues depend on their jobs to feed their families. You're talking about it like it's a line item in a budget report." "Jasmine, please. Let me explain the whole situation." "The whole situation?" "The The whole situation is that you've been lying to me since the moment we met. You know what the worst part is? I actually started to believe this could be real. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I'd found someone who saw me as worth more than what I could do for them. You are worth more. To you? Really? Because it seems like what I'm worth to you is the amusement of watching someone be grateful for crumbs from your table while you plan to take away their entire livelihood. That's not fair. Fair. Jasmine laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been telling me the truth from the beginning. Fair would have been letting me make an informed decision about whether I wanted to spend time with someone who's planning to make me and hundreds of my colleagues unemployed. The hospital is failing financially. The consortium is going to pay above market value for the property. It's actually a good deal for everyone involved. Everyone except the people who work there. Everyone except the patients who depend on us. Everyone except the community that needs that hospital. She picked up her bag. But I guess we don't count as everyone, do we? Jasmine, don't do this. Don't throw away what we have because of business decisions that were made long before I met you. What we have is a fantasy built on lies. What we have is you playing dress up with someone you see as beneath you. What we have is me being stupid enough to think that for once, someone might want me for who I am instead of what I can do for them. That's not true. What I feel for you is real. Is it? Then prove it. Stop the demolition. Pull your investment from the consortium. Choose me over your profit margins. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, Jasmine saw her answer. His inability to immediately agree told her everything she needed to know about where she ranked in his priorities. I can't just, then we're done. Jasmine, please. Give me time to figure this out. Let me find a solution that works for everyone. There is no solution that works for everyone. There's just you choosing what matters more, your business interests or the people whose lives you're affecting. And you've already made that choice. She walked toward the hotel exit, and he followed her. How are you getting to the airport? Let me at least arrange. No. No more arrangements, no more gestures, no more trying to fix things with money. I'll figure it out myself. I always do. Jasmine. She turned back to look at him one more time, and he could see tears in her eyes that she was refusing to let fall. You know what the real tragedy is? I think part of you actually did care about me. But not enough to matter when it counted. Not enough to choose me over a business deal. And that's worse than if this had all been fake from the beginning. It wasn't fake. Then what we had deserved better than this ending. She walked out of the hotel and into the gray Hawaiian morning, leaving Alexander standing in the elegant lobby, surrounded by luxury and utterly alone. For the first time in his adult life, all his money couldn't buy him what he wanted most. And what he wanted most was walking away from him with her head held high, her dignity intact, and her heart broken by his choices. The car service to the airport cost her most of her remaining money, but as Hawaii disappeared behind her, Jasmine felt something she hadn't expected. Not just heartbreak, but relief. She'd walked away from the fairy tale before it could destroy her completely. She'd chosen her self-respect over a beautiful lie. It was the right choice. So why did it feel like she was leaving her heart behind in that hotel lobby? The flight back to New York was the longest 8 hours of Jasmine's life. She'd managed to get a last-minute seat on a commercial flight, squeezed between a businessman who spent the entire trip typing aggressively on his laptop and a mother with a crying baby. The contrast to her journey to Hawaii couldn't have been more stark, and she told herself that was fitting. She was back to reality now, back to her real life where things cost money, and people had limitations and fairy tales were just stories. She didn't cry. She sat in her cramped middle seat, stared out the tiny window when she could see past the businessman's shoulder, and tried to convince herself that she'd done the right thing. Alexander had lied to her, maybe not directly, but certainly by omission. He'd let her believe in something that couldn't exist. He'd made her hope for something impossible while planning to destroy the foundation of her actual life. But as the plane crossed the Pacific, taking her farther away from him with each passing minute, she found herself remembering things she didn't want to remember. The way he'd looked at the manta rays, like he was seeing them through her eyes. The way he'd listened when she talked about her patients, not like someone gathering information, but like someone who genuinely cared about her work. The way he'd kissed her on the overlook, soft and uncertain, like someone afraid of being rejected. Had any of that been real? Or had she just seen what she wanted to see? Meanwhile, in his Maui villa, Alexander sat staring at his laptop screen without seeing it. The consortium meeting notes were open in front of him. Detailed plans for the Brooklyn Methodist development, financial projections, timeline for demolition. All the things he should have been thinking about before he'd impulsively donated a weekend to a hospital raffle. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd created the raffle prize because he'd been thinking about his grandmother, about the overworked nurses who gave everything to their patients and got little in return. He'd wanted to do something meaningful, something that would make a difference in someone's life. Instead, he'd created the cruelest possible situation, falling for someone whose life he was unknowingly planning to destroy. His phone had been buzzing all morning with calls from his assistant, his lawyers, the other investors in the consortium. The Brooklyn Methodist deal was moving forward, and they needed his signature on several documents. The demolition was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, pending final regulatory approval. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Except nothing was going according to plan anymore. He kept seeing Jasmine's face when she'd realized the truth. The way her expression had shifted from confusion to understanding to betrayal. The way she'd stood straighter, gathered her dignity around her like armor, and walked away from him without looking back. She'd been magnificent in her anger, and he'd been powerless to stop her from leaving. The worst part was that she'd been right about everything. He could walk away from the deal. He was wealthy enough to absorb the financial loss, powerful enough to find other investment opportunities. The only things stopping him were pride, habit, and the nagging voice in his head that sounded like his father. Business is business, Alexander. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment. But what if emotions were exactly what his judgment had been missing? His grandmother would have hated the Brooklyn Methodist deal. She would have seen it for what it was: rich people destroying something that served the community so they could get richer. She would have been ashamed of him for participating in it, and she would have been heartbroken to know that he'd let it cost him someone like Jasmine. Alexander closed his laptop and picked up his phone. Richard, it's Alexander. I need you to set up a call with the consortium partners. Today. Of course. What's the agenda? I'm pulling out of the Brooklyn Methodist deal. Alexander, I don't think you understand the financial implications. I understand them perfectly. Set up the call. 3 hours later, Alexander was on a conference call with 8 very angry investors, all of whom were explaining in detail why his decision was financially irresponsible, legally problematic, and generally insane. The contracts are already signed, Marcus Chin was saying. You can't just walk away because you've had second thoughts. I can and I am. My lawyers are already reviewing the exit clauses. This will cost you millions, Patricia Rodriguez added. And for what? Some kind of moral crisis. Something like that. Alexander, came the voice of James Morrison, the consortium's lead investor. What's really going on here? This isn't like you. What's really going on, Alexander thought, is that I met someone who made me remember who I used to want to be. Someone who made me realize that all the money in the world doesn't mean anything if you use it to hurt people who are already struggling. Someone who walked away from me because I wasn't worthy of her, and she was right. I'm diversifying my portfolio, he said instead, focusing on investments that align better with my long-term goals. Since when do you have long-term goals that don't include maximum profit? Since now. It took 2 more hours of legal maneuvering and financial negotiating, but by the end of the day, Alexander had successfully extracted himself from the Brooklyn Methodist Consortium. The hospital would remain open, at least for now. The other investors were scrambling to find replacement funding, and without Alexander's contribution, the deal might fall apart entirely. It wasn't enough to win Jasmine back, he knew that. The damage had been done, the trust had been broken, and she'd made it clear that she was done with him. But it was the right thing to do, and for the first time in years, that mattered more to him than profit margins. He booked a flight to New York that evening. Not because he expected forgiveness, not because he thought grand gestures would fix what he'd broken, but because he needed her to know that she'd been worth choosing, that she'd been worth changing for, that she'd been worth remembering who he used to want to be before the world had taught him to prioritize money over meaning. He didn't expect her to take him back. He just needed her to know that she'd been right about everything, and that walking away from him had been the best decision she could have made. And maybe, if he was very lucky, he could convince her that he was finally worthy of a second chance. As his plane lifted off from Kahului Airport, Alexander realized that for the first time in years, he was choosing love over profit, connection over safety, hope over certainty. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and probably completely foolish. It was also the most important decision he'd ever made. Jasmine had been back at work for 3 days when the rumors started. Whispered conversations in the break room, nervous glances from the nursing supervisors, administrative assistants hurrying past with worried expressions. Something was happening with the hospital sale, but no one seemed to know exactly what. She tried to focus on her patients, on the familiar rhythm of 12-hour shifts that had structured her life for years. But she couldn't stop thinking about Hawaii, about Alexander, about the way everything beautiful in her life seemed to come with a price she couldn't afford to pay. Did you hear? Her colleague Maria appeared at her elbow during the afternoon medication rounds. The sale fell through. Brooklyn Methodist is staying open. Jasmine's hands stilled on the medication cart. What? One of the major investors pulled out. Something about realigning investment priorities. Without his funding, the whole deal collapsed. We're staying open, Jazz. We're keeping our jobs. The medication cart suddenly felt like the only thing keeping Jasmine upright. She knew, without having to ask, which investor had pulled out. She knew, with a certainty that made her chest ache, that Alexander had chosen her after all, or at least, he'd chosen what mattered to her. Are you okay? Maria asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, Jasmine managed. I need a minute. She made it to the supply closet before the tears came. Not the dramatic sobbing of heartbreak, but the quiet crying of someone whose world had just shifted in a way she didn't know how to process. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. He'd walked away from millions of dollars because she'd asked him to choose her over profit. But he'd done it too late. The supply closet door opened, and Jasmine quickly wiped her eyes, expecting to see Maria or one of the other nurses. Instead, she found herself face to face with Alexander, looking exhausted and uncertain and more human than she'd ever seen him. Before you say anything, he said quickly, I know I have no right to be here. I know you don't want to see me. But I needed you to know that I pulled out of the consortium. The hospital is safe. I heard. I also needed you to tell you that you were right about everything. I should have told you about the investment from the beginning. I should have prioritized what mattered to you over what was convenient for me. I should have been worthy of what you were offering me instead of taking it for granted. Jasmine leaned against the supply shelves, studying his face. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, and there was something different about him, a vulnerability that hadn't been there in Hawaii when everything had felt like a beautiful game. Why now? She asked. Why pull out of the deal after I left? Because you made me remember who I used to want to be before I became who I thought I needed to be. Because you were right that I had a choice, and I made the wrong one. Because my grandmother would have been ashamed of me for participating in something that hurt people like you. He paused. And because losing you made me realize that all the money in the world doesn't mean anything if you use it to destroy the things that actually matter. Alexander, I'm not here to ask for another chance, he said quickly. I know I don't deserve one. I just needed you to know that you changed me. That Hawaii wasn't fake for me, even though I understand why you can't believe that. And I needed you to know that you were worth choosing, even if I was too slow to realize it. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd said. You saved the hospital. I stopped participating in destroying it. That's not the same thing. It is to the 300 people who work here. It is to the thousands of patients we serve. She looked at him steadily. It cost you millions of dollars. It was worth it. Even though I'm not taking you back? Even though you're not taking me back. The honesty in his voice broke something open in her chest. This was what she'd needed in Hawaii, this acknowledgement that she was worth sacrifice, that her life and work and community mattered enough to choose over profit. It had come too late to save what they'd had, but it wasn't too late to mean something. I can't trust you, she said quietly. I want to, but I can't. You let me believe in something that couldn't exist, and then you let me find out the truth in the worst possible way. I know, and I can't be with someone who has to lose me before he realizes I'm worth keeping. I know that too. But, she said, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, I think maybe someday I could forgive you. And I think maybe, if you really have changed, if you really want to be someone different than who you were, maybe someday we could try again. Someday. Someday. If you prove that this wasn't just about winning me back. If you prove that you meant what you said about remembering who you used to want to be. Alexander nodded slowly. What would that look like? I don't know. Maybe you could find ways to use your money that actually help people instead of just making more money. Maybe you could remember what your 8-year-old self wanted to build. Maybe you could figure out how to be Alexander Hartwell the person instead of Alexander Hartwell the billionaire. And if I do that, if I prove that I've changed, then maybe you could ask me out for coffee. Real coffee, in a real coffee shop, where we talk about real things and you don't try to solve my problems with money. Just coffee. Just coffee. And we start over, knowing what we know now, being who we really are instead of who we thought we needed to be. Alexander smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since Hawaii. I'd like that. The starting over part. Good. Because I'd like it too, eventually. He turned to leave, then paused at the supply closet door. Jasmine. Yeah. Thank you. For walking away when you did. For being brave enough to demand better. For teaching me that some things are worth more than money. Thank you for proving that you could learn. 6 months later, Jasmine was finishing up her shift when she found a small envelope on her locker. Inside was a newspaper clipping about the Hartwell Foundation's new initiative to fund nursing education programs in underserved communities, and a note written in familiar handwriting. Still working on becoming who I want to be. Coffee sometime. As she smiled, tucked the note into her pocket, and pulled out her phone. Alexander, it's Jasmine. About that coffee. Some love stories begin with grand gestures and fairy tale moments. Others begin with the harder, more important work of becoming people worthy of each other's trust. As Alexander and Jasmine walked into that coffee shop on an ordinary Tuesday evening, they weren't the same people who had met on a private jet to Hawaii. They were better, more honest, more humble, more real. And for the first time, their love story was built on something that could last. The choice to see each other clearly, flaws and all, and to choose each other anyway. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding someone perfect, but about becoming someone worthy of the love we want to receive. What changes have you made in your own life when you realized someone deserved better than who you were being? How do you continue growing into the person your loved ones deserve?